What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, a place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as inspiration. Wow, thank you very much. This is King Von Jr. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. You can follow me, Junior. You can follow me on social media, on Twitter at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page at Victory Pod One. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. Of course, you can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer for Perfect Plex Talk Radio. Of course, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox, on Mondays at 6 p.m. And thank you very much for those that are watching. But we have Twitter, 25 views. Man, that's amazing. Thank you very much for the algorithm. Like I said, keep it coming. Keep it coming. Like I said, by the way, I hope everyone enjoyed their Thanksgiving. I hope everyone had a very happy Thanksgiving this past week. I know I did, and for one, I'm going to give a recap of what went down this week. And for those that are watching by way of YouTube, of course, youtube.com / at Von Resford Jr. Of course, please make sure to like and subscribe for more great content. But yeah, like I said, I enjoyed my Thanksgiving. So 30 viewers, thank you very much. But like I said, I enjoyed it. And it's especially when it came to of course, when it came to Thursday night football. Of course, the Lions and Packers had an excellent game. My favorite game of the week, of course, was the Cowboys. How about the Cowboys? You know what I mean? And like I said, with the way we beat the Chiefs. I mean, like I said, I couldn't be any happier. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and give a recap. Speaking of that, like I said, I'm getting an NFL recap. First, give a recap of the weekend. Some of the things I did. And of course, going to go into the review of Survivor Series, WarGames. I talk about Giannis's future, as well as Cena's last round. This is his last match is right around the corner. Can you believe it? It's going to be the very first time that that we're going to have a Christmas without John Cena. Like, come on now, man. Still feels unreal to even say. So, when it comes to the NFL, as far as Thursday, of course, like I said, the first, the first game, like I said, we saw the first game of of the week was the Packers defeating the Lions. The Packers defeating the Lions 31-24. The Cowboys defeating the Chiefs 31-28. The Bengals defeating the Ravens 32-14. All three of these games were on Thanksgiving. At least the first game of Thanksgiving was the Lions and Packers. The Packers ended up winning 31-24. Like I said, of course, that's in Detroit, though. Then the game right after that, of course, I would say the premier game, the Cowboys and Chiefs, is Dallas defeat Kansas City 31-28, won a 3-game winning streak. So knocked off back-to-back Super Bowl champions. You know what I mean? And then like last but not least, the Bengals defeat the Ravens 32-14. Moving on to the rest of the games. On Friday night, we have the Bears defeating the Eagles 24-15. Then for the rest of the games of the week on Sunday, we have the Dolphins defeating the Saints. The Bears defeating the Eagles. Excuse me. Let me slow down. The Bears defeating the Eagles 24-15. So as far as the rest of the games for the week on Sunday, the Dolphins defeat the Saints 21-17. The Texans defeat the Colts 20-16. The Jets defeat the Falcons 27-24. The 49ers crushed the Browns 26-8. The Panthers defeat the Rams. That was not my bingo card, 31-28. The Jaguars destroy the Titans 25-3. The Buccaneers defeat the Cardinals 20-17. Seahawks completely shut out the Vikings 26-0. The Bills crushed the Steelers 26-7. Chargers defeat the Raiders 31-14. Broncos defeat the Commanders in a close one on Sunday Night Football. Overtime 27-26. And on Monday Night Football, the Patriots defeat the Giants 33-15. And so I'll say that's my recap of when it comes to the weekend football. As far as my weekend, I got a chance to see Zootopia 2. You know, I enjoyed it. You know, it was absolutely amazing. I'm looking forward to as Zootopia 3, and you know, so as far as that. Speaking of movies, um, I've also gotten word so far that apparently, you know, the first trailer for Avengers Doomsday is going to be launching, um, you know, sometime this month. So, you know, I'm definitely on standby when it comes to that. You know, I'm very excited for it. More than sorry about that. Like I said, you know, more than thrilled for the, you know, for something like this. I mean, I dressed up as Doctor Doom, you know, this year, Awesome Con. And speaking of Awesome Con, you know, the voice actors for X-Men '97 are going to be there. So I'm, you know, debating whether or not to dress up as Gambit or Magneto. You know what I mean? Especially since I want to meet, you know, Rhodes voice actors. You know, that's the main one I'm looking forward to the most. But but yeah, you know, very much excited. And apparently, you know, X-Men '97 season 2, you know, should be on the horizon very soon. Um, Outside of that, you know, and other say sports news, um, you know, lately Giannis, you know, Antetokounmpo, Greek Freak, you know, he has scrubbed any references to the Milwaukee Bucks off his social media. You know, the latest tweet that he has um, is a tweet, you know, saying happy birthday, you know, giving a birthday shout out to the late great Laker icon Kobe Bryant, which leads to a lot of speculation. You know, especially with, you know, with Giannis's, you know, contract coming up and all that other stuff like that. Um, you know, it's, you know, in terms of his future, it remains very uncertain. And he's done all that he could do for that franchise. You know, he's won a championship, won Finals MVP, All Star Game MVP. You know, two-time League MVP, Defensive Player of the Year. You know, this, then third. All, you know, these are things within, you know, 12, 13, you know, seasons. He's, you know, like he's the Bucks all-time, you know, scoring leader. You know, he's spent twice as much time in Milwaukee as Kareem. So you could very much make a case for him being, you know, pretty much being Milwaukee's, you know, GOAT at this point now. You know, like I said, very, you know, very strong argument. You know what I mean? But but yeah, you know, like I said, he's given so much of his time, so much of his life, and you know, he's been the ultimate, you know, like, you know, ultimate, you know, sort of a, you know, loyal, you know, foot soldier, if you will, when it comes to the Bucks. And I was more than elated, more than excited when Milwaukee, you know, won the championship in 2021, which happened to be the year before I even launched this podcast. You know, so I was a year late in terms of, you know, in terms of giving that you know, the proper celebration. But you know, like so, you know, like I said, you know, Giannis has, you know, pretty much, you know, pretty much done it all and won it all when it comes to, you know, his tenure with the Milwaukee Bucks, right? So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, if he's looking for greener pastures, you know, and especially for someone, you know, who still wants to win another championship. You know, he's still very much, you know, like at the top of his game and the prime of his career. You know, all those things. You know, he's still constantly competing at a very, very, very high level. You know, and the fact that, you know, the latest tweet that he has, you know, involves the Lakers, and I've seen more photoshops, Photoshop images of Giannis in a Laker uniform. And even though he could go anywhere else, but I would love to see that happen. You know what I mean? You know, like I said, Greek Freak and Luca, you know, LBJ on the same team. You know, I mean, hey, why not? And as a matter of fact, like I say, you know, the Lakers have a penchant, you know, for poaching, you know, the best big men in the history of the game. You know, um, I only say it like this. It felt like we prey on the misfortunes of of other teams, with great centers, great big men, stuff like that. And so as their situation continues to deteriorate, you know, going for the kill. um, of course, whether it was Wilt Chamberlain leaving the 76ers, going to the Lakers, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was in Giannis' situation, leaving Milwaukee and going to the Lakers himself. Shaq leaving Orlando, how that environment was deteriorating, how that relationship was eroding. And it ends up, of course, ends up going to the Lakers himself. And so it's the one thing they all have in common: championships. Even when it comes to Pau Gasol and traded from Memphis, Anthony Davis from New Orleans, what's the one thing that they all have in common? A ring, championship, dimes, like what have you. And so, with our track record, I mean, it speaks for itself. So if Greek Freak, were to, were to, were to put on the purple and gold, come on out, more power to him. It's like I'm at this point. It's whatever it takes, to go past Boston when it comes to, the banner count, when it comes to championships, whatever it takes to get to 19, not 20, faster than them. And look, I'm all for it as a fan. Another thing I, also wanted to mention, before I go into, everything as pertains to wrestling, I also want to say that, that this on Thursday, I officially, wore this really cool jersey. I want to give a shout out to, it's called Park Friends. Yeah, so I want to give a shout out to this brand called Official Park Friends, and it's really cool Disney jersey. They have all kind of Disney themed jerseys. The best ones, I would say the baseball ones, but when it comes to football, I saw this, I couldn't pass it down. I mean, I couldn't pass it the opportunity. So shout out, thanks to Official Park Friends for this really cool, Toy Story Cowboys jersey. Woody, you know, Woody is a Dallas Cowboy. It's very fitting. And right here, number 95. Number 95, of course, it's symbolic because that was the year, the Toy Story came out. So I wore that on Thursday, and safe to say, thankfully, of course, good old Cowboys won. So, man, that's a fire jersey right there. And they have plenty more. Like I said, looking forward, I want to get next up on my list is one of those Disneyland Dodgers jerseys. They have some Star Wars jerseys, Star Wars, baseball jerseys as well. Like Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, type of stuff. They have, like I say, the thing they have a great inventory selection, if you will. They have, like I said, Disney jerseys like Lion King, Avengers, you name it, Star Wars, what have you. Like I said, officialparkfriends.com. I'm gonna, sound like I'm giving a cheap plug, but yeah, that's what it is. But yeah, that's pretty much my recap, in terms of, things I've been, sort of been getting into, as well as some of the fandoms that I have. And so I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to the weekend wrestling, and um, I want to, the main thing I want to cover, especially with, there's going to be a Survivor Series, 2025. But before that, I would like to, like I said, I would like to give a recap of Friday Night SmackDown. So, like I said, before I go into the WarGames review, like I said, let me slow down. Like I said before I even get into my review of of War Games, like I say, so like I said, one of the things I wanted to talk about, especially when it came to Friday Night SmackDown, and so we see that like another round of the last time is now tournament, takes place. Two other matches take place, um, and then of course, like I said, it wasn't too much, to really talk about with this one. Um, and by the way, before I go any further, I want to say congratulations to uh, Lash Legend and Trick Williams for officially getting engaged. You know, I say this all the time: Melo don't miss, and neither does Trick. And it's funny how Trick and Melo gang, both put a ring on it within the same year. So like I said, hats off, to both of them. And it looks like the Performance Center has a better track record than Love Island, when it comes to hookups now. I think it's amazing. Congratulations, it's hilarious, and it's very ironic because the guy that runs NXT, you know, uh, his nickname is HBK Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. Um, like I said, it's very ironic. I think it's hilarious that that the matchmaking is at an all-time high at the Performance Center. When Shawn Michaels, nickname, his gimmick has always been known, as the Heartbreak Kid, HBK. But clearly no hearts are being broken, thankfully. you know, um, but yeah, it's hats off to them. Wish them nothing but the absolute best. Um, I want to give a shout out, side note, not wrestling related, but shout out to local news anchor here in the DC area, my kid Turner. She just announced, on social media her pregnancy, expecting her very first child. So like I say, congratulations. Love is definitely going on in a season like this. Season of answered prayers. Let's go and say it like that. So back to program. Friday Night SmackDown. And we see that that LA Knight and Jey Uso one step closer to retiring John Cena. And the last time now this tournament, the matches where Jey Uso defeated Rusev by way of pinfall after an Uso splash. Then we have LA Knight defeating The Miz by pinfall with the BFT. And with other things that happened on SmackDown, Jay Cargill crashed Chelsea Green's Women's United States Championship celebration and hit her with the Jaded. Charlotte Flair defeated Asuka by way of pinfall with the Natural Selection, as Charlotte won her team the advantage for War Games. The MFTs, might as well get rid of this thing altogether. Solo, Tama Tonga Loa, JC Mateo, and Tala Tonga defeated Sami Zayn, Shinsuke Nakamura, Ray Phoenix, and the Motor City Machine Guns by way of pinfall and a traditional Survivor Series match. So, with this new era of War Games being on the main roster, now they moved the traditional 5-on-5 matches to SmackDown. And not only that, but it was only one, traditional Survivor Series match, to the point where, the very match, that built this pay-per-view or PLE, the very match type, that built this, event into what it became, has now been relegated to a go-home match, a match on the go-home show of Survivor Series. Quite a time we live in. That would a traditional Survivor Series match, not being on Survivor Series itself, was not on my bingo card. If anybody were to tell me anytime before War Games happened, let's say somebody would tell me in about 2005, 2006, 2007, whatever, that Survivor Series would take place on SmackDown. If somebody told me that, I would have given you an RKO. Because that's something I couldn't even fathom. But now we're in the War Games era. So, excuse me, ever since 2022, WarGames is now on the main roster. At first, it was mainly on NXT. So as far as that, so it wasn't until 2022, with the whole Bloodline era and all that other stuff like that going on. Um, now it's officially been transitioned to the main roster. And the things I'm cool with that, but there's a part of me that wants to see, like, well, let's say, maybe one War Games match and then one, traditional match. I'll say it like this. You can either do one men's War Game match and then one women's, Survivor Series traditional match, elimination match, or you could do, a women's War Games and a men's Survivor Series, on the same card. But hey, what do I know? What do I know, right? What do I know, right? Somebody who's spent 30 years, watching wrestling, 30, 31, 32 maybe years of being exposed to wrestling, good portion of my life, So hey, I've seen so much crazy stuff without really taking a break from it, for real. Other people talk about even taking breaks from wrestling. I seldomly ever take one. So hey, what do I know, right? But I digress. Now it is time to go into. I'll just say, I think I'm gonna keep this, the main focus, the main thing, as it pertains to Survivor Series War Games. And this year, Survivor War Games took place in San Diego, hometown of Nia Jax. So let's get into it. So, like I said, this is the fourth, War Games on the main roster. The first one was 2022 in Boston. The Bloodline was the main focus. So that was an incredible match. Then right after that was 2023 in Chicago. Hence, that's why I'm wearing this, because that was the same night that CM Punk and Randy Orton made their returns. Right. In 2024, last year, was in Toronto. That was the first War Games where Roman Reigns and CM Punk were actually partners. And then, of course, this year, 2025. Like I said, last year was in Toronto, and so this year is in San Diego. And so now this is the first War Games under the ESPN umbrella. I'm going to share my thoughts about that in a minute. But, like I said, this is the 39th annual Survivor Series, as it took place on Saturday, November 29th, at Petco Park in San Diego, California, home of the San Diego Padres. Hence, that's why Cena wore that Padres last time is now shirt. So like I said, this is the first Survivor Series to take place in an outdoor venue, by the way. This is, historic, groundbreaking, if you will. First time it took place, outdoors, and the first to take place in a stadium, and the first to be held in a Major League Baseball venue. Like I said, home of the Padres. And the second to be held the second one to be held in California after the 2018 Survivor Series in Los Angeles. And so, those are just some, historic facts. And the attendance was 46,016 in attendance. So when it comes to the match card, the women's War Games match started. It was, of course, with Team Rhea, AJ Lee, Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, Io Sky, and last but not least, Rhea Ripley, as they defeated Team Asuka, which was led by Becky Lynch, the Kabuki Warriors, Nia Jax, and of course Lash Legend. Lash was the last one to make her entrance, and that is when the War Games began. And Lash Legend, she was trending that night too. Like, man, like you can definitely tell there were people on the internet, who had no clue who she was, but but they started, doing their homework in terms of, in terms of her being a former basketball player, going into wrestling, um, not to mention her engagement, the trick, you know, um, and just I think, and just when it comes to someone who is a natural eye magnet, that's definitely Lash Legend. You want to talk about someone who whose face card is always approved? Look no further than Lash Legend. You know what I mean? Like that image, that size, that athleticism right there speaks money. So when she was with Metaphor, as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't no question. It wasn't even a contest in terms of who was going to stand out more, who was going to, be a bigger draw, who was going to, who was going to, get a bigger push, what have you, all these different type of things, who was going to, you know, um, really capture the imagination, capture the eyes of the fans, no more than Lash Legend herself. No offense to, Jakara, Mara Sade, what I mean? Like I said, no offense to her, but when you teamed up with somebody like that, you gotta know the choice, but to pretty much, know the choice, pretty much, but to fade into the background. Um, but yeah, of course, in this match, Lash definitely, for me, I feel like she became the breakout star of this, and I feel as though this tag team with Nia, and this exposure is meant for her, to be more of a breakout, more of a breakout player, and that she was in this match, you know, um, and it seemed for a minute, that they were going to get an advantage, uh, and so of course, uh, Nia and Lash, definitely made their presence known. Like when it comes to size and dominance, standpoint. Um, and so of course we still have the lingering feud with AJ Lee and Becky Lynch. You know what I mean? Like, and of course with Kabuki Warriors and Charlotte and Io. Uh, and of course Rhea, let's see, Rhea being, rather the Kabuki Warriors, feud with Charlotte and Alexa, and of course Rhea and Io or Rio. That's who they are now. And but of course, I want to talk about Monday night as well. But like I said, the main thing, my main focus is going to be WarGames tonight. And so things looked as though Team Oscar was going to get the advantage. The tide would soon change when Oscar accidentally missed it. Actually sprayed the mist in Lash Legend's face, and you could hear the fans yelling, "You effed up! You effed up! You effed out!" Yeah, and then before you know it, of course, Io, she has a fascination. Wow. Like I say, and speaking of it, side note, looking at ESPN top news, Giannis is in talks with the Bucks about his future. Go figure. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, um, I would say, eventually the tide will soon change in favor of Team Rhea, as like I says, Io clearly has a fascination, with not only diving off the top of the cage for WarGames, but diving off the top of the cage with a trash can, and that she did. You know what I mean? Io is the genius of the sky, and she proved that. And eventually Team Rhea will get the win as AJ puts Becky in the Black Widow again. So, come on. Of course, a feel good moment for AJ, but eventually, I feel like it's got to get to a point where AJ and Becky actually, go toe to toe, 1-on-1, instead of these mixed tag matches. Especially with Becky losing the IC title to Maxine Dupree of all people, whatever. Yeah, I digress. And speaking of the Intercontinental title, yeah, I would say the men's IC title is far better than the women's IC title. And I'll say that this was a breakout match for me. when it comes to these matches on the card. I'll say of course Dirty Dominic Mysterio, accompanied by Raquel Rodriguez and Roxanne Perez, would defeat John Cena by way of pinfall. And obviously it's said to be my favorite match of the night. And I've seen it not only for for the action in the ring, but also with the women being involved the way that they were, because we saw both Raquel and Roxanne hit their finishers on Cena. I was like, oh shoot! As soon as I saw as soon as I saw Raquel, sneak up on Cena from behind and hit him with that was the Tejada bomb, looks like her choke slam. I'm like, all right then, that's one thing. All right, she's close to Cena, up to Cena's size anyway, so she's strong enough to do that. Then Roxanne, hits the pop rocks, which is really Canadian Destroyer. I was like, oh, okay, cool. This is Cena's way of elevating women. And not only that, but we saw the highlight for me was the return, the long-awaited return of Liv Morgan. And so it looks as though she turned her back on, or rather, she was getting revenge on Dominic. And clearly, she's a student of the game, because she jumps up at John Cena's arms, gives him a hug, only for the camera to take that shot of Liv's face when Cena wasn't looking. So she's a student of the game because she ripped the page right out of Cena's book from this year, from the Elimination Chamber when he turned heel. And it was, like I said, it was the same shot. It was line for line, bar for bar. When Cena's not looking, the camera shows Liv's face, and the smile is gone. It's like she just transforms into another person. And then she, gets out of Cena's arms, and then kicks him right in the crown jewels, just like Cena did to Cody, at Elimination Chamber. It was almost, like I said, side by side, play by play, to the point. Even with Liv hitting Cena with the title, the same way as Cena hit Cody with the title, costing him the championship the same way that like of course ultimately cost Cena the Intercontinental title, as the IC titles back with Dirty Dom and Judgment Day. So your winner and new WWE Intercontinental Champion, 2-time IC champion, Dirty Dom, Dominic Mysterio. So Cena now has only one match left. We'll get to that in a minute. So the match right after that, we have Stephanie Von versus Nikki Bella. It's definitely definitely a vehicle to elevate Stephanie. I mean, go figure. And Nikki's better as a heel anyway. So the winner of this match, and still the women's world champion, Stephanie Von. The fact that Nikki Bella is putting in more work in the ring than AJ Lee in 2025, no way you could have told me that 10 years ago. And last but not least, we have the men's WarGame match. The Division, consisting of Braun Breaker, Bronson Reed, as well as Logan Paul, Drew McIntyre, and Brock Lesnar, take on the team of CM Punk, Cody Rhodes, the Usos, and Roman Reigns. And the winners of this match by way of pinfall and thanks to interference is the Division. And Brock and Roman did not waste time choosing violence, so especially with him and Lesnar, and things, especially as soon as Roman was going for the Superman punch, Lesnar, of course, Brock picks him up and just drills him with the F5 through the announce table, and so other than that, like I said, just absolute chaos. Like I said, of course, it's absolute chaos just continue to take place. But I actually, know what? I'm not even going to go that far, but I would say, the thing that really was a big turnoff for me was when Jey Uso, like in the middle of the match, runs back his interesting, like and just starts doing his the yeet shtick, if you will. I was like, you're in the middle of war and you're running back doing this. Like, yeah, this Jey Uso thing is just overkill. And it clearly shows that Jay is definitely, for me, has worn out his welcome when it comes to being that spot in the main event and all this other type of stuff. You know, um, yeah, this experiment is not experimenting, the way that many people thought that it would. Certainly myself. Um, but yeah, what I mean. Like I said, stuff like that. That's what I took away some points for me as far as the match is concerned. Um, and so, like I said, I'll say like this. Of course, CM Punk and Braun Breaker opened the match with Punk entering by scaling the cage. Drew McIntyre entered next to give his team the advantage. Of course, his Punk was left bleeding after being scraped against the cage. Cody, of course, ends up entering later by climbing the structure. And alongside Punk delivered a heart attack and a doomsday device to shift the momentum in their favor. Then Logan Paul entered with the steel stairs, followed by Jimmy Uso with the table. Then Bronson Reed went into the match and hit multiple tsunamis upon entering, followed by Jay, who delivered super kicks and a 1D with his brother Jimmy to Logan Paul. Then, of course, this one, Brock Lesnar entered with Paul Heyman, followed by Roman Reigns, who delivered spears and brass knuckle strikes to his several opponents. And then at the end of the match, near the end, we saw a masked, unidentified wrestler appearing at the top of the cage and attacking CM Punk with a super kick and a curb stomp, which enabled Braun Breaker to hit the spear to pin Punk for the Vision's victory at WarGames. And so, after the match, Roman Reigns helped CM Punk to his feet and they even exchanged a fist bump with him, but told Cody that they would not be teaming together again before walking away. Roman's had enough. Roman has absolutely had enough of this Cody team up, and quite frankly, so have I. Yeah, this WarGames just felt so underwhelming. I think it's just a product of this TKO era. So much stuff here just feels very underwhelming. It's not exactly what you envision, if you will. If we did one gotta go when it comes to these last four WarGames on the main roster since 2022, we got to do one gotta go. This one, without question, has to go. It's not even close. It's not even an option in terms of which WarGames I would eliminate, and it would certainly be this one. I'm kind of torn between 2020. We know we're in 2023 right now. I could make the case for that being number one, especially with the surprises. And then I could say 2022. Just because of what happened, because of the bloodline supremacy. And then after those two, I would go with 2024 WarGames, and this one will be last. So that is my do a ranking of this. So pretty much it's pretty much as far as that. I would say when it comes to the men, you could make a case for for 2020 for the 2023 WarGames. For the women, you could say 2022. But yeah, I think the thing is, I'll just, like I say, sometimes kind of tough to really rank these, but I would say, 23 and 22 are definitely the top two, war games in the, like when it comes to the main roster. And actually, you know what? No, I'll scratch that. I would say, that the men's, I say when it comes to the men's war games, the 2022 without question was the best one. You know what I mean? Like, especially when it came to Sammy Turner or KO, it just the bloodline at the top of their game. You know, it was just like, this was definitely peak bloodline. The bloodline at its absolute pinnacle. Roman was still the most dominant individual, in WWE at the time. It was no question he was head and shoulders above everybody else. And that 2022, excuse me, War Games night in Boston, was a prime example of that. And so, I'll say after that, I'll go with the women's War Games from 2023, and that was the first time Bianca had those had the double braids. I was like, oh man, all right, then she had two weapons with her. Yes, and so of course the winner of that match was was Team Bianca with Becky, Charlotte, and Shotzi. You know what I mean? So, of course that's when that's when Becky and Charlotte finally teamed up, for a bigger cause, to be a part of Bianca's team. So as far as that is concerned, yeah, that's it pretty much. Like I said, I'll say 22, 23, 24, 25. Right. Not to say that not to say they regressed or anything, but what I mean. Like it's just like as long as 25 is the one that's got to go. It sounds like I'm being indecisive, but there's some great Survivor Series, War Games, matches and moments. So as far as if I were to come up with all-time War Games roster, actually, I'll write that up. I'll write that up. But you know what? Let me think about it. I will go with Roman Reigns. I would go with The Undertaker. I will go with Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, and probably Randy Orton. So if anything, if I were to draft, pretty much an all-time, War Games, War Games roster. And lately, when it comes to WWE 2K games, the War Games mode has definitely become one of my absolute favorites. And I feel as though I definitely need to do that. Need to do that more often on these games. But yeah, but other than that, it's a whole other story in and of itself. If I were to give War Games a rating, this year's War Games a rating, it would be 2.5 out of 5 Edge World Heavyweight titles. If I could just just think right off the bat. It's like I say, at least you got a world title, but at the same time, the impact, like I said, it's like the long-term impact isn't really there. It's not really moving the needle the same way that a Cena title will move the needle, the same way even a Randy Orton title will move the needle, and certainly not in the same way that Roman titles will move the needle. So, pretty much that's the way I see it. Now it is time to move on to Monday Night Raw. To this, and once again, like I said, thank you to everyone who's been watching tonight. I definitely appreciate the spike when it comes to numbers. So the matches that were announced, of course, in advance for Monday were the two last time is now tournament matches. With Jey Uso versus LA Knight, Gunther versus Solo Sikoa, and the World Tag Team Championship match, AJ Styles and Dragon Lee versus the New Day. And that match definitely had a huge moment. And I'm going to get into that later. So Monday Night Raw, kicks off. Of course, it takes place in the Desert Diamond Arena in Arizona, and so like I said, it kicks off with the Rhea Ripley and Io Sky promo, and so of course on the heels of the victory side WarGames, Rio kicked off Raw by announcing their intentions to continue the rivalry with the Kabuki Warriors, and to do so by challenging them for the World Tag Team Championships. Of course, this one, Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair interrupted. By the way, Charlotte looks great these days, especially when it comes to her fashion right now. And this was, no different. Like I said, Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, the former champions, took exception and confronted the duo, collectively as Rio. And the former champions laid down the challenge, for a match between the two teams later tonight. With of course with Rhea and Io proudly accepting, they accepted without question. And so, of course, this is up in a big main event between four of the biggest stars in the women's division. But yeah, they want to invoke their rematch clause. Of course, Charlotte and Alexa, that is. So that's the way of telling Rio to get to the back of the line. The next up, we have the last times now tournament semifinal, Jey Uso versus LA Knight. The winner of this match to advance to the final is LA Knight. Not much to really say right there with that one. So it's just like I say, not too much to say. And then of course backstage we saw Oscar Lorraine Bailey not joining her team at WarGames when the role model is reminded her that they lost, and Versus tomorrow reminded her that it's Charlotte in the main event tonight, not her fellow Four Horsemen. Then we have the Dirty Dom promo, and where Dominic Mysterio told the fans of Arizona that he's the greatest of his family, became the Luchadors the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time, obviously with the chorus of boos, like only Dominic Mysterio could do. Gave props to his Judgment Day teammates Finn Balor, JD McBowerhead, Roxanne Perez, Raquel Rodriguez for helping him out Saturday night, and called out his main squeeze, Liv Morgan. And of course, Liv Fashion says, "I'm back." And she talked about missing Dom and her Judgment Day friends before turning her attention to rumors and speculation that he was weak and falling apart. She said Judgment Day now runs Monday Night Raw and is coming for everything and everyone. That's when Liv slapped down there before jumping in his arms, to finish this segment. It really gives off Joker and Harley Quinn. That's really what this thing reminds me of. So next up, excellent match, World Tag Team Title match, AJ Styles and Dragon Lee versus the New Day. And the winners of this match and still the tag team champions, AJ Styles and Dragon Lee. And the sequence at the end, where Dragon Lee does some type of stomp or whatever he was doing, like off the top rope, and he kicks Kofi so hard that Kofi bounced off the ropes and of course into a Styles Clash. I said, "Man, this was, oh my gosh, like that was one of the best sequences for a move I've ever seen." Yes, and of course afterwards we saw a vignette. We saw featuring Natalia training Maxine Dupree, and the upcoming arrival of the low-key legend persona that Natty's used in her handful of independent appearances, including she was doing a Bloodsport during WrestleMania weekend, I believe. So basically for Natty to show this side of her, on main WWE programming, I'm all for it. And so Division have a promo. They're still bragging following, the Victory Survivor Series. Paul Heyman cut an amazing promo, shouting out every one of the members of his WarGames team before labeling Breaker the uncrowned World Heavyweight Champion. And of course, Braun says, I'm upset by how easy it was to pin CM Punk. And clearly the second generation, star kind of angry promo in which he vowed to tear Punk apart and beat him for the top prize on Raw, when the Raw ran on January 5th on Netflix. He threw down the microphone and stomped out, leaving his teammates behind. So it's a huge moment for Braun Breaker. He had the chance to start on the mic, and he made the most out of it. Showing that intensity and fire that you want out of the top star. I mean, after all, look at his family line, look at where he comes from. And so I was like, yeah. So as far as that, then like part of it, you kind of want to rein in a little bit so it doesn't come off Steiner Mathish, if you will. But other than that, he's heading in the right direction. So the purpose for me of the vision is really for Braun Breaker to grow and become a bigger name for himself. Then next up, we have the second last time is now, tournament semifinal. So as we get closer to the finals themselves, we have Gunther versus Solo Sikoa, the reigning general. Gunther wins this match, and now it's Gunther versus LA Knight in the finals of the tournament next Monday to determine who will be John Cena's final opponent. And we have Rhea Ripley, Io Scott versus Charlotte Flair and Alexa Bliss. And of course, sorry about that. So these two teams fought to a double disqualification. Because of Judgment Day's interference. Of course, along with Bailey and Lyra, making the save. And so from there, Raquel, Lyra, and like I said, this Liv all arrived. Raquel, Roxanne, and Liv. Raquel, Roxanne, and Liv arriving, and of course that's when they all three of them stood tall. I know there are people online saying they could be the female version of Shield. I mean, we will see. Time remains to be seen. But so like the highlights for this will be Braun Breaker's promo, which feels like a breakout, if you will. Liv Morgan's return, the brilliant match between Gunther and Solo to Jey Uso's crash out, and it was definitely an improvement from what we saw on Saturday, and like I said, it's definitely something to really be more of a morale booster. After a lot of fans like myself, weren't really feeling what was presented to us on Saturday. So like I say, as far as this episode Monday Night Raw, I would say that this is definitely an improvement from what we saw on Saturday. And that says a lot. That says everything. And so of course, the show opens with Ava standing in the ring with the 5 women who compete in the Iron Survivor match this week in the deadline. We have Kalani Jordan getting the most heat when she spoke, and she tried to talk over booze, but she didn't seem too thrown off by it. But the boos were so loud that they distracted from her a little bit. Fatal Influence came out, so JC Jacobs could talk some trash to everyone. Kalani and Jordan Grace kicked off a huge brawl, and then we saw that Booker T wasn't at the show, so Corey Graves took his place this week. And we saw that Ariana Grace versus Thea Hale. The winner of this match, Thea Hale. Tim Heights versus Josh Briggs. The winner of this match, Josh Briggs. Then we have Fatal Influence versus Soul Ruka. Of course, Kevin Gray and Lola Vice. And the winners of this match, Soul Ruka, Lola Vice. Start with that. Like I said, Soul Ruka, Kevin Gray and Lola Vice. Those are the winners. And then we have OTM versus Chase U. OTM actually defeated Chase U. Like both these scenes in my estimation have seen better days. Dark State versus Joe Hendry, Leo Slater, Javon Evans, and Miles Bourne. And the team of Joe Hendry, Slater, of course, Miles Bourne and young OG Javon Evans, and of course defeat Dark State. I wouldn't expect anything less. But yeah, like I said, So, of course, this episode of NXT was pretty solid. I'll say that the best event of the weekend, like I said, was Monday Night Raw, and that's just a lot considering we just had Survivor Series. And so pretty much my final review. And so before I go, I would like to give birthday shout outs. And so this past Monday, comedy legend Richard Pryor would have turned 85. On December 2nd, pop legend Britney Spears turns 44. The legendary Tretch from Naughty by Nature turned 55. Yvonne Orji, of course, turns 42. On December 3rd, Tiffany Haddish turns 46. Montel Jordan turns 57. And by the way, I'm still praying for him, by the way, during this cancer battle too. Like I said, Montel Jordan, Mr. This Is How We Do It, turns 57. Ozzy Osbourne would have turned 77. December 4th, of course, another Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, Jay-Z, turns 56. Tyra Banks turns 52. December 5th, the architect of rock and roll, the pioneer himself, Little Richard, would have turned 93. The Dynamite Kid would have turned 67 on December 5th. On December 6th, the Greek freak himself, Giannis Antetokounmpo, turns 31. On December 7th, of course, Larry Bird, turns 69. Of course, Terrell Owens turns 52. So those are the birthdays for this week. And of course, before I go, I would like to give a word of wisdom. Is that you have to be annoyed enough with the devil to tell him, I got time today. So some of the points that I got from this past Sunday's message, shout out to Reverend Joshua Jenkins, is to get annoyed with the enemy, address the enemy, and take authority over the enemy. So just to let him know, I got time today. And with this podcast, I got time today and time always. but yeah, so if anything, if anything, I would say that those are my words of wisdom. And always remember that you are victorious because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. And of course, please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. I'm also on YouTube, once again, youtube.com/Avon Respect Jr. And of course, thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for watching. And of course, may this day be the absolute very best day of your